The mid-1950s marked a golden era in American automotive styling. Fins were taller, grills were wider, and horsepower was the new obsession. But in 1955, amid all the glitter, there was still one thing dangerously missing: safety. This was a time before seat belts were standard or even commonplace. Many 1955 models were death traps that offered little chance of survival in a serious crash. Here are the 10 most dangerous American cars of 1955. Cars that looked great on the showroom floor, but turned out to be deadly.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10. The 1955 Pontiac Star Chief was a product of the burgeoning jet age, a time when car design emphasized chrome, space-age motifs, and dramatic styling over functional safety. As the flagship model of Pontiac's lineup, the Star Chief was long, bold, and draped in chrome, intended to convey power and prestige. But beneath its eye-catching exterior was a vehicle plagued by dangerous engineering flaws, many of which endangered its occupants in the event of a crash. This lecture explores how the Star Chief, while a symbol of post-war American optimism, was ultimately an example of a car where style trumped substance, particularly when it came to occupant protection. One of the defining visual features of the 1955 Star Chief was its massive chrome nose, which jutted forward with an intimidating presence. The front bumper and grille assembly was all about aesthetics, offering no energy absorption in a collision. In a crash, the rigid chrome front end would transfer impact energy directly into the frame and cabin, increasing the risk of injury. Unlike modern vehicles with deformable crumple zones, the Star Chief's front end was unforgiving steel on steel. Great for looks, terrible for survivability. While it looked strong, it was actually structurally dangerous, amplifying the force of impact rather than absorbing it. The Star Chief's dashboard was a steel slab adorned with chrome accents, and that translated to a serious risk in crashes. The edges of the dash were sharp, with minimal rounding or padding. In a frontal collision, unrestrained occupants, there were no seat belts, would be launched forward into this metallic wall of injury potential. Even minor collisions could cause lacerations or blunt force trauma due to the interior's hard surfaces. Like many cars of the era, the Star Chief featured a rigid steering column attached directly to the steering box. In a crash, the column could be driven rearward into the driver's chest, a phenomenon known colloquially as the spear. Worse, the steering box itself was known to fail under severe frontal impact, potentially detaching and collapsing, creating a catastrophic loss of steering control even if the driver survived the crash. In an era before collapsible steering columns, this was a deadly design oversight. In 1955, safety belts were not standard equipment, and Pontiac made no effort to include them in the Star Chief. Without restraints, occupants were at the mercy of Newton's first law in a crash. They kept moving even when the car didn't. Front passengers could be catapulted into the windshield, the dashboard, or out of the car entirely. Interior padding was a luxury, not a standard, and the Star Chief didn't offer it. The steering wheel, door panels, and dash were all made of hard metal or Bakelite-style plastics. In a crash, these became rigid strike zones, compounding the severity of injuries. The cabin environment of the Star Chief offered zero passive protection for its passengers. The Star Chief was a heavy, full-size sedan, but used drum brakes that were underpowered for its mass. Braking distances were long, especially when loaded with passengers. On downhill stretches, the brakes could fade quickly, compromising driver control. The steering system of the Star Chief was vague and over-assisted, making precise maneuvers difficult, particularly dangerous during evasive moves or emergency stops. Combine this with bias ply tires and limited road grip, and you had a car that was ill-suited for any kind of crisis response. In short, the Star Chief had the bulk of a battleship, but none of the control. It's important to understand the cultural priorities of the mid-1950s. American consumers wanted longer, lower, wider cars with plenty of chrome and jet-age flair. Safety was not a selling point. In fact, manufacturers downplayed safety concerns, fearing they might scare off buyers. GM's philosophy at the time was to focus on comfort, power, and image, and the Star Chief embodied all three. Unfortunately, safety engineering lagged far behind, and the result was a car that was visually impressive but functionally dangerous. The 1955 Pontiac Star Chief is a classic example of a vehicle that represented the best and worst of its time. It symbolized post-war prosperity and American automotive dominance, yet its engineering ignored basic safety principles. Its chrome nose, sharp dashboard, faulty steering system, and lack of restraints made it a rolling death trap in the event of a collision. With no meaningful protections for its passengers, the Star Chief reflects an era when automotive beauty and performance were prioritized far above survivability. It took decades of crashes, injuries, and deaths before the American car industry began to treat occupant safety as a design priority, a shift that vehicles like the Star Chief, tragically, helped to make necessary. Number 9. The 1955 Chrysler New Yorker was a striking, powerful luxury sedan that embodied the post-war American dream. Long, loud, and full of horsepower. With its bold forward-look styling and the famous early generation Hemi F8, it was a car that promised thrilling performance. But that promise came at a steep cost. Handling, braking, and safety were dangerously neglected. This lecture explores how the New Yorker, while technically advanced in terms of powertrain, was structurally unfit for the performance it advertised, making it a hazard on the road when pushed beyond gentle cruising. Chrysler equipped the 1955 New Yorker with the 331 cubic inch Hemi F8, generating up to 250 horsepower, impressive for the era. It was one of the earliest mass-market engines to use hemispherical combustion chambers, giving it excellent breathing and high-speed efficiency. Acceleration was respectable for a large sedan, and the engine was smooth and durable. But here's the catch. While the car could go fast, it had no corresponding improvements in stopping power or control. Despite its power and bulk, the New Yorker still used four-wheel drum brakes, which were notoriously prone to fade. Under repeated use, like going downhill or during emergency braking, the drums would overheat, and stopping distances would lengthen dangerously. For a car weighing over 4,200 pounds, this was a massive safety failure. Pedal pressure varied dramatically, and with no brake assist in base models, drivers had to exert considerable force for adequate deceleration. In wet conditions, the drums were easily compromised, sometimes pulling the car unpredictably to one side. In short, the brakes were completely outmatched by the engine. The big Hemi F8 sat forward of the front axle, making the car nose-heavy and leading to understeer in corners. Combined with soft suspension tuning, the New Yorker leaned hard into turns, reducing tire grip and response. Chrysler used a kingpin front suspension with leaf springs at the rear, a carryover from earlier models. This setup provided a smooth ride on straight roads, but was unstable during evasive maneuvers, making high-speed driving risky. The car rode on tall, narrow bias-ply tires, which offered minimal grip and poor sidewall rigidity. These tires limited lateral control and amplified the body roll effect, leading to potential loss of control in turns. As with most cars of the era, the 1955 New Yorker lacked seat belts, padded dashboards, or collapsible steering columns. In a crash, occupants were thrown forward into hard surfaces or through the windshield. The non-collapsible steering column was a lethal hazard. It could be driven back into the driver's chest in a frontal impact. This was a common injury mechanism in mid-century American cars. Chrome accents and hard plastic or Bakelite interiors created shrapnel-like conditions during collisions. There were no safety cages, no crumple zones, and no energy absorption strategy in the design. Chrysler's advertising focused on the $100 million look styling, designed by Virgil Exner, the prestige of owning a powerful, spacious sedan, the luxury feel of features like the PowerFlight automatic transmission. What they didn't focus on, and what buyers didn't yet demand, was safety. While Chrysler was ahead in powertrain development, it was far behind in safety and dynamics. There was no consideration for how to control or survive the power it created. The 1955 Chrysler New Yorker is best understood as a beautiful but hazardous contradiction. It was technologically advanced under the hood, yet archaic everywhere else. With big horsepower, tiny brakes, soft suspension, and zero crash protection, it was a vehicle far too dangerous for any driving beyond a calm Sunday cruise. Chrysler's obsession with power and style came at the expense of real-world drivability and occupant safety. In essence, the New Yorker had the engine of a muscle car and the handling of a freight train, with nothing to protect you when things went wrong. Number 8, the 1955 Nash Ambassador represented an ambitious attempt to combine mid-century American luxury with aerodynamic, almost futuristic styling. Known for its unique air-flight design, the car stood out with its bulbous body, enclosed fenders, and smooth contours. It was marketed as a modern marvel with integrated features, like fold-down seats that could convert into a bed. But beneath its quirky design and creature comforts lay a disturbing truth. The Ambassador was structurally unsafe. From the fold-in front structure to the solid bench seat with no restraints, the car became a rolling risk to its occupants in even moderate collisions. The bathtub, or bubble styling, was Nash's response to the growing popularity of jet age design. While the shape theoretically aided airflow, crashworthiness was never part of the equation. The sloping, rounded nose and thin metal grillwork lacked reinforcement. In a frontal collision, the front end was known to collapse inward, funneling crash forces directly into the passenger compartment. Unlike cars that began experimenting with rudimentary crumple zones or frame separation, the 1955 Ambassador's design often funneled destruction toward the firewall and floor pan. Typical of its era, the Ambassador featured a wide, flat bench seat with no contours or bolstering. This seat was designed more for comfort than containment and lacked seat belts, head restraints, or any lateral support. In a frontal crash, both driver and passengers had nothing to restrain forward motion. The steering column, dash, or windshield were often the final stopping points, with deadly consequences. Nash marketed the fold-flat front seats as a sleeping solution, but this added structural weaknesses to the seat mounts and created gaps that could become pinch points in a crash. Like many 1950s cars, the interior was loaded with metal accents, Bakelite knobs, and rigid plastics. In a collision, these elements became blunt force weapons. There were no padded dashboards or energy-absorbing structures. The Ambassador prioritized ride comfort with a soft suspension, which caused the car to float and sway at speed. This led to slow steering response and increased body roll, particularly dangerous in evasive maneuvers. It relied on four-wheel drum brakes, which were adequate at best but easily prone to fade. The tall, skinny bias-ply tires offered minimal grip, and under hard braking or cornering, they lost traction quickly. Nash advertisements focused on aerodynamic efficiency, fold-flat seats for sleeping, spaciousness, and modern styling. What was never mentioned was the lack of safety restraints. The vulnerable body structure, the car's tendency to fold or buckle in real-world crashes. In the rush to appear futuristic and family-friendly, Nash had built a vehicle more focused on gimmicks than survivability. The 1955 Nash Ambassador serves as a cautionary tale in automotive history. It was bold in appearance and generous in creature comforts, but it was dangerously behind the curve in terms of occupant protection and structural integrity. Its fold-in front end, unrestrained seating, and unstable ride dynamics made it a very real threat to its own drivers. Nash may have been thinking about the future in terms of looks, but not in terms of longevity or safety. Number 7. The 1955 Plymouth Plaza was marketed as a no-frills vehicle for cost-conscious Americans. Positioned below the Belvedere and Savoy in Plymouth's lineup, the Plaza was stripped of nearly all creature comforts and safety considerations to meet its rock-bottom price point. While this made it attractive to families and fleet buyers, it also meant that durability, structural integrity, and crash protection were severely compromised. In essence, this car was a rolling example of 1950s cost-cutting, and the people inside it paid the price in accidents. The Plaza was built with minimal trim, basic materials, and thinner sheet metal. Plymouth engineers prioritized volume and affordability over quality or occupant safety. Compared to higher-tier models, the Plaza used lower-grade body panels and fewer welds, resulting in weak torsional rigidity. In collisions, the body had a tendency to crumple unpredictably, with little ability to absorb or redirect energy. Like most cars of the time, the Plaza lacked seat belts, head restraints, or padded dashboards. The steering column was solid and unforgiving, and passengers were vulnerable to ejection or blunt force trauma, even at low speeds. Bare metal dash, rigid knobs, and basic seating. All of these surfaces became dangerous projectiles or impact zones during a crash. Equipped with four-wheel drum brakes, the Plaza was prone to brake fade after repeated stops. Emergency braking often resulted in long stopping distances and loss of control, especially in wet or downhill conditions. The Plaza featured leaf springs in the rear and simple coil springs up front. While adequate for slow city driving, the setup became unstable at highway speeds or under emergency maneuvers, increasing rollover risk. The Plaza typically came with narrow bias ply tires on steel wheels, which offered poor lateral grip. These tires were vulnerable to blowouts, and their limited traction made cornering hazardous. In frontal or side collisions, the Plaza's thin pillars and unreinforced cabin structure often collapsed inward. With no crumple zones, passengers absorbed the brunt of the force. The Plaza's tall, narrow stance and soft suspension made it susceptible to rollovers, especially during evasive maneuvers. Many Plaza models were sold as taxis, police vehicles, and rental fleet cars, putting large numbers of people at risk. The Plaza's low price point made it a popular choice, but its lack of safety meant it turned minor accidents into major injuries. The 1955 Plymouth Plaza was a classic example of how automotive affordability in the 1950s was a major factor in the popularity of the Plymouth brand. 1950s often meant sacrificing occupant protection. While it may have met the budget needs of many Americans, it came with hidden costs, namely a higher risk of injury or death in the event of an accident. No safety engineering, minimal structural integrity, poor handling and braking. The Plaza wasn't just cheap, it was dangerously underbuilt. It serves as a grim reminder that cost-cutting in car design, when taken too far, puts lives at stake. Number 6. By 1955, Packard was struggling to retain its image as a maker of refined, top-tier automobiles. The Patrician, its flagship sedan, represented the brand's ambition to remain competitive in the face of advancing technology and modern styling from Detroit's Big Three. On the surface, it had the luxury, plush interiors, ornate trim, and impressive road presence. But underneath, it was an aging platform with obsolete engineering and a driving experience that had grown increasingly hazardous in real-world conditions. The 1955 Patrician tipped the scales at over 4,300 pounds, making it one of the heaviest cars in its class. Combined with outdated suspension geometry and a soft ride tune, this mass translated to slow and unpredictable emergency responses. Unlike emerging unit body designs, the Patrician relied on an old-school ladder frame, which lacked the rigidity or impact distribution of modern safety structures. This made the car feel floaty, especially under hard cornering or braking, exactly when drivers needed precision. The recirculating ball steering system was light but imprecise, especially at highway speeds. The long wheelbase added to the Patrician's inability to change direction quickly in emergency maneuvers, increasing the risk of collision or rollover. Soft springs and shocks created a cushy ride, but also led to extreme body lean in turns. Sudden swerves or evasive maneuvers often resulted in loss of control, a particular danger for such a large and heavy vehicle. The Patrician had a tall body with relatively small windows, especially toward the rear. Drivers were burdened with large blind spots, making lane changes or parking more dangerous. Despite its luxury status, the seating arrangement made it hard to get a commanding view of the road, particularly for shorter drivers. Though common at the time, the Patrician's large mass made its non-ventilated drum brakes woefully inadequate. Long downhill drives or stop-and-go traffic often led to brake fade, requiring extra distance and luck to stop in time. Not all models came with power brakes. Those without it required considerable pedal pressure, further reducing stopping reliability for average drivers. There were no crumple zones, no seat belts, no padded surfaces, and a solid steel dashboard. The steering column was rigid and aimed directly at the driver's chest, a deadly spear in frontal collisions. Glass was non-laminated, making it prone to shattering into sharp fragments upon impact. The 1955 Patrician symbolized a brand that was out of step with safety and performance progress. While it impressed with its aesthetics and comfort, it was a dangerous car to push in any serious driving condition. It was built for smooth, gentle cruising, not evasive action or modern traffic speeds. The 1955 Packard Patrician may have looked regal in the driveway, but it demanded caution behind the wheel. Its outdated chassis, heavy weight, and lack of basic safety considerations turned this luxury car into a liability in emergency situations. Sluggish in emergencies, underbraked for its mass. No protective features whatsoever. In hindsight, it was a car built for an earlier era, unfit for the faster, more demanding roads of the 1950s. A rolling reminder that luxury without modern engineering is simply dangerous nostalgia. Number 5. The 1955 Lincoln Premier was Ford's answer to the booming luxury car market, aiming to compete directly with Cadillac and Packard. It offered opulence in size, styling, and power. But this ambition came with a trade-off, a car that looked impressive on the boulevard, but struggled when real-world driving demands kicked in. Beneath its sweeping lines and flamboyant chrome was a car that was dangerously overbuilt for its mechanical and safety capabilities. At over 223 inches long and with a curb weight of more than 4,400 pounds, the Premier was a land yacht in every sense. The sheer size made it hard to maneuver, especially in urban settings or narrow roads. Its weight didn't translate to improved safety or stability, just more inertia and longer stopping distances. Lincoln's engineers prioritized a cloud-like ride to rival Cadillac, which resulted in overly soft springs and underdamped shocks. The car floated over bumps, but that came at the cost of precise control or road feedback. In emergency situations, the soft suspension created extreme body roll, delayed responses, and a high chance of losing control, especially on curving or uneven roads. The Premier used large but unventilated drum brakes, which overheated quickly during repeated or prolonged braking. Brake fade was a common and dangerous issue, especially given the car's weight. In real-world testing, the Premier's stopping distance at highway speeds was among the worst in its class. In a panic stop, drivers were met with a vague pedal feel and poor modulation, increasing the risk of collisions. Like most cars of the era, the Premier had no crumple zones, seat belts, or energy-absorbing interiors. The steering column was rigid and posed a major threat in a frontal impact. The sheer weight of the doors could work against passengers in side collisions, and the door latches were prone to popping open in a crash. The non-laminated glass shattered into sharp fragments. The dashboard was made of steel with chrome trim, making it a dangerous surface in even low-speed impacts. The 341 cubic inch V8 delivered ample horsepower, around 225 horsepower, but the car lacked the suspension and steering geometry to handle that power effectively. Acceleration was decent in a straight line, but cornering was a gamble, and stopping was worse. The 1955 Lincoln Premier was a visual and sensory triumph, but a mechanical liability when it mattered most. It embodied 1950s luxury excess, but without the technology to back it up with safety or control. It was too heavy to stop quickly, too soft to steer confidently, and too outdated to protect anyone in a crash. In retrospect, it serves as a sobering example of how the era's obsession with size and status often came at the expense of driver and passenger survival. Number 4. The 1955 Buick Roadmaster was designed to be a symbol of prestige and high performance. It had a muscular V8 under the hood, dazzling chrome trim, and the kind of road presence that turned heads. But beneath the bold styling and confident marketing was a car whose performance exceeded its safety capabilities, especially in an era where crash engineering was still non-existent. The 1955 Roadmaster featured the 322 cubic inch nailhead V8, producing around 236 horsepower. For its time, It was a fast, powerful cruiser, especially with a smooth Dynaflow automatic transmission. Designed for long-distance comfort, the Roadmaster excelled in straight-line acceleration and top-end cruising, but its powertrain outpaced the development of safe braking and chassis control systems. All four wheels used drum brakes, which were undersized for the Roadmaster's 4,400-plus pound weight. The brakes suffered from fade after repeated stops, especially on descents or in city traffic. In an emergency, stopping distances were long and inconsistent. Brake bias and lack of venting led to loss of pedal feel, a major risk at highway speeds. The Roadmaster had no seat belts, no airbags, and no energy-absorbing materials inside. In a collision, the steering column and metal dashboard often became lethal projectiles. The long rear overhang and rigid, unreinforced trunk structure crumpled poorly in rear-end collisions. The fuel tank was positioned vulnerably, and rear passengers had no structural buffer between them and the impact. The heavy roof pillars and small rear window created substantial blind spots, especially for lane changes and reversing. Buick's Glide Ride suspension was tuned for comfort, not precision. The car wallowed during cornering, and combined with the vague steering, made evasive maneuvers difficult. The Roadmaster's cabin was filled with sharp chrome trim and hard surfaces. In a crash, these added to injury risks rather than reducing them. Unlike later unibody or semi-unibody cars, the Roadmaster's body-on-frame construction lacked strategic crumple zones. This meant violent force transfer directly to the occupants in high-speed impacts. The 1955 Buick Roadmaster was a vehicle of confidence and speed, but it was built in a time when style and comfort outweighed occupant survival. It symbolized the era's belief in chrome and horsepower, but it left drivers and passengers extremely vulnerable in real-world driving scenarios. Its brakes couldn't handle its bulk, its structure couldn't absorb crash energy, and rear-end collisions could be catastrophic. It was a cruiser, yes, but not a safe one. Number 3, the 1955 Studebaker President was a strikingly elegant car that blended sophistication with modernity. Designed to capture the post-war American desire for luxury and performance, it boasted a streamlined body, well-appointed interior, and a smooth V8-powered drivetrain. However, beneath its polished surface, the President was significantly under-engineered when it came to safety, particularly in the areas of stability, crash survivability, and rollover resistance. The narrow track of the Studebaker President made it more prone to instability, especially in high-speed maneuvers. Cars with a narrow track tend to have less resistance to side-to-side motion, body roll, which can make the car feel unsteady when changing lanes or taking curves. The President had a relatively tall body for its era, exacerbating its top-heavy nature. This imbalance led to a heightened risk of rollovers, especially during sharp turns, emergency lane changes, or evasive maneuvers. Unlike many of the more advanced designs of the future, the 1955 President lacked crumple zones. This meant that in a collision, the full force of impact was transferred directly to the rigid cabin, significantly increasing the chances of occupant injury. With its body-on-frame design, the President did not incorporate the kind of energy-absorbing structures that would later become common in automotive safety. The frame, although strong, lacked integrated reinforcement to protect passengers in a crash. The President's suspension system, while tuned for comfort, was not designed to handle extreme driving conditions like emergency maneuvers or sudden evasions. The soft suspension allowed for excessive body roll, increasing the risk of tipping over during sharp turns or sudden lane changes. Unlike modern vehicles, which might include roll bars or reinforced roof structures to prevent cabin collapse during a rollover, the 1955 President offered no such protection. A rollover could lead to catastrophic cabin deformation, as the body was not designed to withstand such forces. The President's braking system was adequate for everyday driving, but its drum brakes were not sufficient for the car's weight and size, especially in emergency situations. Brake fade could occur after repeated heavy braking, which increased stopping distances, a major safety issue when trying to avoid a crash. The narrow track and top-heavy body led to sloppy handling, especially when making sharp turns or driving on uneven surfaces. Drivers would find it difficult to control the car during evasive maneuvers at higher speeds, making the vehicle prone to losing stability in critical situations. Like many vehicles of this era, the 1955 Studebaker President came with no seatbelts. This lack of restraint systems meant that during a collision, passengers would be thrown around inside the cabin, increasing the potential for injury. The dashboard was typically hard and angular, which could turn sharp edges into injury risks during even minor accidents. The steering column, in particular, was not designed with any modern energy-absorbing features, meaning it could impale the driver in a crash. Studebaker, known for its innovative and stylish designs, prioritized aesthetic appeal over safety considerations in the President model. The sleek, futuristic design may have been eye-catching, but it came at the cost of stability and crash resistance. While the President's exterior was impressive with its clean lines and elegant proportions, its engineering was still rooted in the past, relying on outdated concepts like the body-on-frame design without the integrated safety features of future models. The 1955 Studebaker President was a stunning example of post-war American automotive design. Elegant, sophisticated, and modern. However, beneath its polished surface, the car lacked the essential safety features that would come to define later generations of vehicles. Its narrow track, top-heavy build, and lack of crumple zones made it an accident waiting to happen, with a high risk of rollover and serious injury in the event of a crash. The President's performance and style were more than capable of impressing on the road, but in terms of safety, it was severely lacking, serving as a reminder that automotive technology in the mid-20th century was still evolving, and that elegance alone wasn't enough to ensure protection in an emergency. Number 2. The 1955 Chevrolet 150 was introduced as an affordable entry-level model aimed at budget-conscious buyers. Part of Chevrolet's effort to cater to the growing demand for economical cars in the post-war period, the 150 was designed to keep prices low and make car ownership accessible to more people. However, in its pursuit of affordability, the 150 sacrificed key safety features, making it a risky choice for those driving it. While the 150 offered great value in terms of price and practicality, its lack of safety features would become a notable concern as the automotive industry moved toward recognizing the importance of crash safety and occupant protection. One of the major safety flaws of the 1955 Chevrolet 150 was its lack of a reinforced frame. Unlike more advanced cars of the time that began incorporating strengthened frame structures or reinforced areas designed to absorb impact forces, the 150 stuck to a basic, non-reinforced frame. This meant that in the event of a crash, the frame offered little protection for the car's occupants. The impact force would transfer directly to the cabin, increasing the potential for injury. The 150 featured a traditional body-on-frame design, which was standard at the time, but often provided limited protection in a collision. Unlike unibody construction, which was designed to absorb impact more effectively, a body-on-frame setup left the passenger compartment vulnerable to crumpling under impact. In modern crash tests, this design is often associated with higher injury rates due to the lack of energy absorption and structural reinforcements. The 150 was equipped with drum brakes, which were common for the era, but lacked the stopping power necessary for a car of its size and weight. With low-tech braking systems, drivers of the 150 faced increased stopping distances and could experience brake fade when the brakes became overheated after extended use, such as in a long downhill drive or during emergency stops. Brake fade occurs when the friction material on the brake pads becomes too hot, causing a reduction in braking efficiency. For the 150, this meant that in emergency situations, the car would take longer to stop, increasing the likelihood of an accident. The 150 was designed to be as affordable as possible, which meant that power brakes, a common safety feature by the late 1950s, were not included. As a result, drivers had to exert more force to stop the vehicle, which could be difficult in an emergency situation, especially when quick action was needed to avoid a crash. The 1955 Chevrolet 150 was not equipped with crumple zones, which are designed areas of the car that deform during a collision to absorb energy and reduce the force transferred to passengers. Without crumple zones, the stiff, rigid frame of the 150 meant that any crash would directly impact the passenger cabin, offering minimal protection for the people inside. In a head-on collision or side impact crash, the car's structure would not absorb the shock in a way that would reduce injury. The 150 was a basic model that came with few safety features, including no safety glass or padded interiors. Modern vehicles would have shatter-resistant windows to protect passengers in the event of a crash, but the 150 used regular glass, which could shatter and cause injuries. The lack of padded interiors meant that in a collision, passengers would have to contend with sharp, unyielding surfaces. In modern cars, padded dashboards and safety restraints help to mitigate injury during a crash, but these were not present in the 1955 150. The 150 featured narrow tires, which were a common feature for affordable cars in the 1950s. While narrow tires helped to reduce production costs, they offered poor grip, especially on wet or gravel roads. Slippery conditions would increase the chances of loss of traction, making the car more likely to skid or lose control. In emergency maneuvers, the limited tire traction made it harder to maintain control of the vehicle. The suspension system of the 150 was designed to be simple and cost-effective, but it did not offer much in terms of handling or ride comfort. The suspension was stiff, which made the car less stable during sharp turns or evasive maneuvers. The lack of sophisticated shock absorption meant that road irregularities would be felt more directly by the occupants, and the vehicle could be difficult to control in challenging driving conditions. Number 1. The 1955 Mercury Custom was part of the famed Mercury brand's mid-range offerings, positioned between the entry-level Ford and the high-end Lincoln. It combined luxurious features, a smooth, cushy ride, and an imposing presence with its large size and attractive chrome details. However, beneath its attractive design and comfortable ride, the Mercury Custom had significant flaws in terms of safety that went unnoticed by many during its time. While the soft suspension and big cruiser feel made it a pleasure to drive on smooth roads, its lack of crash protection and minimal crash engineering made it a dangerous choice in the event of a collision. This lecture will break down how the 1955 Mercury Custom's design and lack of safety features would prove hazardous in accidents, particularly in side impact crashes, where the risks were especially high. The 1955 Mercury Custom was designed with a soft suspension system intended to deliver a smooth and comfortable ride, especially on highways or long-distance trips. Floaty, cushy suspension was a trademark of many mid-50s cars, giving the Mercury Custom a luxurious, cloud-like ride. However, the same suspension system that made it so pleasant on long stretches of smooth asphalt was actually a liability when it came to handling and safety. In emergency maneuvers or on uneven terrain, the soft suspension compromised the car's ability to maintain stability, making it more prone to rollovers or losing control when driving aggressively or avoiding an obstacle. The soft suspension was not ideal for tight turns or sudden lane changes. In emergency situations, the car would likely suffer from excessive body roll, making the car more unstable. A combination of soft springs and lack of advanced shock absorption meant the Mercury Custom would weave in sharp corners and struggle to maintain its trajectory, especially at higher speeds or on slippery surfaces. One of the most glaring safety concerns with the Mercury Custom was its lack of crash engineering. The vehicle was constructed with a traditional body-on-frame design, a feature common for the time, but one that did not incorporate modern safety features such as crumple zones, or energy-absorbing materials. In the event of a frontal or side collision, the car lacked reinforced side pillars or impact-absorbing structures to protect occupants. The frame and body did not have the rigidity required to withstand the forces of a crash, and the soft exterior would likely absorb little impact energy. One of the most significant shortcomings of the Mercury Custom was its vulnerability in side impact collisions. The car's wide, soft body provided little protection in this regard. During side impacts, there was a high chance of cabin intrusion, meaning the side of the car would collapse inward, severely jeopardizing the safety of the occupants. The lack of side impact bars and poor door design meant that, in a crash, the passenger compartment would be prone to deformation, with very little ability to absorb crash forces before they reach the occupants. Side collisions are particularly dangerous because there's little space between the impact and the occupants. In the 1955 Mercury Custom, the lack of structural reinforcements and poor door strength meant that cabin intrusion was almost a guarantee. Cabin intrusion occurs when the outer panels or door sections collapse and invade the passenger area. This can result in serious injuries to the occupants, particularly to the legs and torso. Since the Mercury Custom lacks side impact bars or any significant side door reinforcement, the risk of injury was higher than many other vehicles of the time. The absence of modern safety features like side airbags, energy-absorbing padding, or even reinforced steel in critical areas left the Mercury Custom's occupants at high risk in a side impact accident. The car's soft suspension would not provide the necessary stability to prevent injury when the car was hit from the side. Side impacts were notoriously dangerous because they often resulted in severe injury to the driver and front passenger, who were not protected by the kinds of safety barriers found in modern cars. The Mercury Custom's steering was vague and unresponsive at times, making it difficult to control in high-speed situations or during emergency maneuvers. The lack of power steering and imprecise steering linkage made it harder for drivers to make quick adjustments when necessary. In emergency situations, this lack of steering precision would make it harder for the driver to avoid a crash or maintain control of the vehicle. The Mercury Custom also had issues with its braking system, which consisted of drum brakes that were prone to brake fade during heavy use. The braking system was underpowered for a vehicle of its size, making it more difficult to stop quickly in an emergency situation.